X for Josh almost made it through the gate. Ticket scanned, bag checked, smile practiced. No one noticed. Not until the pilot stepped out of the cockpit. Sharp steps, slow and motioned her aside with quiet authority. Not angry, not alarmed, just certain. "Where did you get that tattoo?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She froze. For years, she'd hidden it beneath sleeves, under silence, away from everything. But now, 30,000 feet below her past, someone had finally recognized the mark, and suddenly, her whole story was about to take flight. The airport was forgettable, one of those mid-tier terminals nestled between major hubs, long halls of gray tile, automatic announcements repeating every 15 minutes, and overpriced coffee served in cups that bent with heat. It was the kind of place built for transients, for people passing through, for stories that weren't supposed to linger, and that suited her just fine. Her boarding pass read Hannah Lewis, clean name, no flags. Her ID matched. Her posture was confident, casual. Nothing in her stride betrayed the years it had taken to walk like she belonged. She wore a navy sweater despite the heat, sleeves tugged down slightly past her wrists. The sweater wasn't fashion. It was armor, a layer of memory kept hidden beneath cotton, one thread away from unraveling everything. Hannah had boarded dozens of planes in the last 3 years. She always booked window seats, always chose early morning flights, always kept her head down, and she always made it through. Until now. She was halfway down the jet bridge when the call came soft direct. "Ma'am, one moment." She turned slowly, not nervous. Not yet. The voice was calm, not official. But it wasn't from TSA. It came from the man in uniform pilot stripes. Salt gray hair, a face that looked like it had spent most of its years in altitude. Captain Reese. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at her like he was trying to place something he hadn't seen in decades. And then he asked the question she never thought she'd hear. "Where did you get that tattoo?" Her heart didn't race. It stopped. She said nothing. Because how do you answer a question that breaks your cover with a single glance? She had gotten it 15 years ago. She was barely 17 then. No documents, no status, no safety net. Just a room in an old industrial shelter and the number 34,821 scrawled into her memory, the number of the dormitory block she and her sister had been processed through after arriving at Camp Lawn. Back then, they weren't called residents. They were called unaccompanied minors with provisional detainment. It sounded cleaner, almost merciful. But it wasn't. Camp Lawn wasn't a place for healing. It was a place for hiding things. Governments didn't know how to face refugees. Too old for foster care, too young for work permits, too quiet to be remembered. The tattoo wasn't official. It was something she and the others did themselves, in secret. Crude numbers etched beneath the skin in defiance. Not to glorify what they'd been through, but to remember it. To prove they hadn't imagined the whole thing. Years later, when the camp was relocated and the files went dark, everyone assumed the records were gone too. No names, no trails, no justice. Hannah, or the girl who would become Hannah, peered into the system, adopted under a different name. College on a scholarship she never spoke about. A career in nonprofit logistics. Always moving, never staying. And always the sweater sleeves. Until Captain Reese looked past all of it. "Ma'am," he asked again, softer now. She met his eyes. "I think you have the wrong person." But something in her voice betrayed the line. Not panic, not protest. Just that tiny crack grief remembering its own reflection. Reese didn't press. He stepped aside, let her board. But she felt it. The recognition wasn't over. She found her seat in the back of the cabin. A window, just as she preferred. But her fingers didn't rest near the shutter this time. They curled slightly toward the fabric at her wrist. The tattoo, the mark no one had seen in years. Except now someone had, and worse, she had recognized it. Because Captain Reese wasn't just any pilot. Years ago, he had flown humanitarian routes for a military transport program. He was one of the few who had seen Camp Lawn from the air, and from the ground he had delivered supply crates. Evacuation manifest. And once, in a storm that nearly grounded his aircraft, a set of sealed files containing names of miners scheduled for forced transfer. He remembered the numbers. Not all of them, but enough. 34,821 was one of them, and that meant he remembered her. The intercom crackled. His voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 24632 Portland. We're expecting a smooth ride today." She barely heard the rest. Her past wasn't supposed to speak again, and certainly not at 30,000 feet. She leaned her head against the window, eyes closed, trying to breathe, trying to decide. Do nothing, or finally answer the question that had followed her through every boarding gate since. Where did you get that tattoo? And why? After all this time, did someone finally ask? She didn't sleep during the flight, even as the seatbelt signs dimmed and the cabin settled into the quiet hush of altitude. Hannah sat tucked in, head tilted toward the window, but her reflection staring back at her from the plastic pane. The question, the one the pilot had asked, looped silently in her head. Where did you get that tattoo? But beneath it pulsed a louder one. What does he remember? And what will he do with it? By the time the cabin crew began their soft rustle of descent prep, she still hadn't decided. Speak or vanish again. Say nothing and let the past settle back into dust. But that decision wasn't hers anymore, because just before landing, a flight attendant leaned in quietly. The captain asked if you'd be willing to speak with him. Off record. After we land, her throat tightened. Is it mandatory? No, ma'am. Just requested. She nodded once. She didn't have to agree, but something in her stillness, forged through too many years of silence, stood up quietly, internally, and answered, "It's time." After landing, she waited near the service door, her carry-on hugged against her side like a shield. The plane emptied, the engines wound down, and then there he was. Captain Reese stepped through the curtain slowly, hat off, posture relaxed, but his gaze steady. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her the way people look at a photograph they thought was lost then. I thought I was imagining it. At first, she said nothing. I saw it before. You know that, Mark. Not on you and your sister. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag. He noticed you two were always together. You, and was it Mina? Her knees almost gave. No one had said that name aloud in over a decade. Yes, she said. Mina. He exhaled, slow, shaky. I remember her laugh. It cut through that place like light. Hannah swallowed hard. It didn't last. No, he said. I read the transfer log. She looked up, met his eyes. They told me she was being relocated. Different districts. Safer, shelter. I know, but that wasn't true, was it? No, he said. It wasn't. That single confirmation shattered something soft in her chest. Something held together for years by guesses, half hope, and the mercy of forgetting. She had never confirmed what she feared, never had the courage to chase records that were likely destroyed. But now, with one word, it was over. And worse, someone had known. Why didn't you say anything? Her voice came low, almost fragile. He didn't flinch. Because back then, I couldn't. Everything was locked. The files, the manifests. I was just a pilot with a clearance code and a cargo list. I wasn't allowed to ask questions, and when I did, they grounded me for 3 months. She blinked. So you stopped? No, he said. I started documenting, quietly. I kept a ledger, photos, copies of the unredacted lists. I've been collecting names ever since. For what it's worth, yours was never on the final list. Final list, the one marked untraceable outcome. Her blood ran cold, so she was on it. Yes, and there it was. The injustice, fully named. They hadn't just lost her, they'd erased her. And Hannah had carried that erasure like a phantom limb ever since. She nodded slowly, quietly. I don't want sympathy. You don't need it, he said. You need justice. She laughed softly, bitter. Justice for who? There's no record of us left. There's mine, he said. She looked up. I kept the tattoo numbers, the intake files, the photos of the yard. I thought one day someone would come back, ask, And if they did, I could show them it was real. Tears came suddenly, not because she was sad, but because it was the first time someone outside that fence had believed her without proof. You kept them. He nodded. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't save any of you, but I could remember. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hannah did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She rolled up her sleeve. The tattoo was faded, crooked, ugly, but it was hers. He looked down, and slowly, carefully, he pulled something from his bag. A notebook, worn, leather-bound, cracked at the edges. Inside, lists, names, numbers, sketches, photos, and on one page, 34,821, her, and beside, IT 34820. Mina Hannah reached out and touched the ink, not to confirm it, but to claim it. This is what they never wanted us to have, she whispered. A record. He closed the notebook gently. You don't have to run anymore, he said. They can't hide this now. But she didn't answer, because the real conflict wasn't between her and the system anymore. It was between her past and her silence. Because now that she had the truth, would she dare to speak it? That night, she didn't go to her hotel. She booked a quiet Airbnb near the old city library. And she stayed up until sunrise, scanning every page of his ledger, every photo, every document. She uploaded them to a secure cloud. Then she made a list of every name, not for revenge, for restoration, because the children of Camp Lorne hadn't been weak. They had been forgotten, and now she could finally remember them out loud. It started with a name. She created a file simple, clean, titled The 348 Project. No headlines, no social media flair, just a quiet upload to a digital archive hosted through a nonprofit Veterans Records Initiative. Inside it, scans of Captain Reese's notebook, the old photos, the intake tags, fragments of handwritten logs that proved Camp Lorne existed in a way no government ever wanted to admit. She didn't use her real name, not at first. The site description read only, for those who remember, the yard with the blue tarp fence. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. The people who mattered found it. First came an email, then another, then a dozen. I saw this. I remember the number boards. My brother had 34,814 on his arm. We never knew what it meant. I thought I dreamed of sirens. This proves I didn't. They weren't seeking revenge. They were seeking confirmation that their memories weren't betrayal, that the silence had a shape, that someone, somewhere, remembered. And now they had that. But Hannah wasn't finished. She printed the names, everyone. She and Reese had recovered. Dan walked them, one by one, into the civil rights documentation unit at the National Archive Registry. She didn't ask for attention. She asked for recognition. For Camp Lorne to be officially listed among the country's lost holding centers, for those whose stories were stripped to be named again. The clerk blinked when she explained the origin of the names. These don't exist in any federal system, she said. I know, Hannah replied. That's the point. They were hesitant. Bureaucracy always is. But the documentation was real. Dates matched satellite logs. The locations, though renamed, still bore the shell footprints on the outskirts of the desert. One by one, the registry team verified enough to force the process forward. It would take months, but it had begun, and that alone would have been enough. Until the news broke. Not hers. Captain Reese's. He had retired quietly the previous week. No ceremony, just a folded uniform and a sealed final log. But someone in defense had leaked his notebook to a journalist or reporter working on a piece about declassified humanitarian efforts post-2000, and buried in the article's appendix was a single line, documented proof of Camp Lorne. Once believed, exaggerated, confirmed through first-hand ledgers and survivor tattoo records. Source, Ret. Captain L. Rees. Cross-referenced by independent researcher known only as 34,821. She saw the article late at night, blinking at her laptop screen in disbelief. He had named her, not with her legal name, with hers, 34,821. And somehow, it felt right. The name they'd used to reduce her, had now rebuilt her. Within days, she received a call from a National Public Records Committee asking her to participate in an upcoming testimony hearing regarding undocumented holding sites. They didn't ask her to speak as a victim. They asked her to speak as a witness. She almost declined. But the morning of the hearing, she pulled a long-forgotten box from the back of her closet. Inside it, a bracelet, cloth-woven faded purple. It had once belonged to Mina. They had made matching ones in the yard out of yarn they'd stolen from the supply bins. She hadn't worn it since the transfer. She put it on, tugged her sleeves up, and walked into the hearing with her tattoo visible for the first time in public. The room was larger than she expected. Cameras, reporters, rows of officials. She ignored all of it, focused on her breath. When the panel asked her name, she answered, Hannah Lewis, former resident of Camp Lorne, tattoo 34821. They asked her what happened. She didn't give them drama. She gave them memory, describing the processing rooms, the chalk-stained yard, the clipboard codes. The night they came for Mina, her voice didn't shake. It held. And when she was finished, the room was quiet in the way that only truth can silence people. She stepped down, but she didn't leave, because one final twist remained. As she passed the hallway back to the exit, she saw a young woman seated alone, staring at her phone. She looked familiar, too familiar. Hannah slowed, and the woman looked up, then stood and whispered, "You remember." Hannah's mouth opened, but no words came, because it wasn't just a stranger. It was Lena, Mina's childhood friend from the East Corridor dorms. The girl who used to braid Mina's hair before lights out. The girl they said had been deported. But she was here, alive, and she'd seen the article. They hugged, not with ceremony, with something deeper. A recognition of survival. A reunion of names once thought erased. "I thought I was the only one left," Lena said, eyes wet. "You weren't," Hannah whispered. "None of us were. We just didn't know how to find each other." Now they did. Now the silence had an address. They met the next morning, just Hannah and Lena on a bench outside the records office. No cameras, no crowd. Just two women who had once been children behind the same blue tarp fence. Now older, quieter, scarred, and whole in equal measure. Lena brought coffee. Hannah brought the bracelet. They didn't talk about trauma. They didn't need to. Their silence was not emptiness, it was recognition. They shared it like a language no one else around them could speak. When they did talk, it was about building. "I didn't think there'd ever be a way forward," Lena admitted, watching the sunlight stretch across the pavement. "I kept telling myself I imagined most of it, that maybe the bad parts were just dreams." "They were real," Hannah said. "But now we've got proof, and we can decide what to do with it." Lena pulled a folded pamphlet from her coat. "A small community clinic in New Mexico. I've been working here. Some of the kids that come through, you can see it. Same eyes, same silence, same survival instinct. They don't say much, but they listen to everything." Hannah studied the pamphlet. "You want to help them?" "I already do. But we could do more with the truth, with the archive. If we brought our names forward." Hannah hesitated. She'd spent most of her life erasing the tracks behind her, moving city to city, name to name. She thought anonymity had kept her safe, and maybe it had, but safety had also kept her small. Now, maybe it was time to be seen. Within a month, the 348 project shifted from digital archive to something living. They hosted the first closed gathering in Portland, a quiet, off reunion for survivors and affiliated volunteers. 37 people attended. 28 were former residents of Camp Lorne. Some had scars. Some had sealed court documents. Some brought nothing but questions. Hannah answered what she could. She brought copies of the files. Captain Reese attended as well, now in civilian clothing, older, slower, but sharp as ever. He brought the ledger. That night, as dusk rolled in and paper lanterns flickered against the breeze, Hannah read a single entry aloud. It wasn't her own. It was Mina's. 34,820. Name, age, intake, date, the dorm number, and the word transferred. Afterward, she folded the paper and placed it in a memorial box they'd built from a salvaged camp locker door. painted white, now the rust sealed under lacquer. On it, one word, seen. They all stood around it, not in silence, but in presence. The next day, something else happened. One of the attendees, a former paralegal named Royce, stepped forward. "I've been working in immigration law since I got out. I think we have enough now to formally petition the Department of Human Services to reopen these records." Another, a journalist, chimed in. "I'll publish, not sensational, just factual. These voices deserve daylight," and Hannah said yes, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. Because truth, once spoken, deserves echo. The weeks that followed moved like tide, quiet, steady, impossible to stop. Media picked up the story in pieces. At first, just a footnote in a long-form investigation on refugee detainment sites, then a segment, then a televised panel. Survivors came forward one by one, not with blame, but with testimony. Records surfaced, old staff anonymously confirmed, details long buried under bureaucracy. Eventually, Camp Lorne was added to the National Registry of Disbanded Detainment Programs. A plaque was commissioned, not for a statue, but for a simple steel marker on the overgrown land where the camp once stood. Hannah didn't attend the unveiling. She sent Lena. "I think I need to remember it my own way," she wrote. Instead, Hannah visited Mina's last listed CETA, desert clearing outside the transport route where transfer logs ended. There was no grave, no stone, just open land. She sat there for hours, said nothing, let the wind carry her breath. And then, softly, she took off the bracelet, the one they'd made together. She buried it in the sand, gently, deliberately, not to forget, to leave something behind that didn't have to be hidden anymore. Back in Portland, Hannah returned to her work. She helped Lena expand the clinic outreach. They built a trauma-informed education series for displaced teens. Adding a unit called Paper doesn't make you real. Memory does. She gave talks not at conferences, but at night shelters, at classrooms, where a teacher quietly said, "He hasn't spoken in a month, but he drew this after you left," and handed her a sketch of a camp fence. And numbers, sometimes the numbers weren't complete. Sometimes they were. Every time, she remembered and wrote them down. Captain Reese passed away quietly 2 years later. Natural causes. His family held a small service. They invited Hannah. At the wake, his son approached her with a weathered envelope. "He told me to give you this." Inside, the original notebook, the one that started it all. On the first page, a new entry written in the captain's handwriting, 34,821. She remembered, she rebuilt, she restored, she cried, not for the past, for what it finally meant. Today, the 348 Project is its own entity, not a nonprofit, not a protest, just a place where names once lost are found again. Hannah doesn't run it, she curates it. She adds names when they come in. She deletes none. She still travels, but she no longer hides. Her sleeves are rolled up now. The tattoo is still there, faded, stretched, imperfect, but not invisible, because she isn't either. Not anymore. Some marks are never meant to fade, not because they hurt, but because they witness. Hannah's tattoo was never about rebellion. It was about memory, about refusing to let silence rewrite truth. She lost everything once, her sister, her identity, her voice. But when someone finally saw her, she didn't run. She remembered, she rebuilt, and in doing so, she gave others the courage to come forward too. This wasn't justice handed down. It was dignity, reclaimed quietly, fiercely, and without apology. If you believe that memory matters, that even forgotten stories deserve daylight, with the word, because dignity lives where silence is broken, where truth is kept, where someone finally asks, "Where did you get that tattoo?" And someone brave enough chooses to answer,